The 1965 war between India and Pakistan did not erupt from a vacuum. Its origins are deeply rooted in the complex and painful partition of British India in 1947. This division created two new nations, India and Pakistan, but left the fate of several princely states undecided. Among these, the beautiful and strategically important region of Jammu and Kashmir became the most contentious. Its Hindu Maharaja initially hesitated, but eventually acceded to India amidst a tribal invasion backed by Pakistan. This decision was immediately contested by Pakistan, leading to the First Indo-Pak War of 1947–48. That conflict ended with a United Nations-mediated ceasefire, establishing a line of control that divided Kashmir, leaving a legacy of bitterness and an unresolved dispute that would poison relations for decades to come. The core issue remained. Both nations claimed Kashmir in its entirety, making it a persistent flashpoint. Following the 1947–48 war, tensions over Kashmir continued to simmer. The line of control was a de facto border, but neither side accepted it as a permanent solution. Political rhetoric in both countries frequently invoked the Kashmir issue, fueling nationalist sentiments and mutual suspicion. For Pakistan, the integration of Muslim-majority Kashmir was seen as an unfinished agenda of the partition. For India, Kashmir's accession was legally sound and a testament to its secular identity. The intervening years saw sporadic skirmishes and a constant state of military preparedness along the line of control. The desire to decisively resolve the Kashmir issue, particularly within certain circles in Pakistan, grew stronger as time passed, creating a volatile atmosphere where any spark could ignite a larger conflagration. This underlying tension was a constant factor in the geopolitical landscape of South Asia. A significant prelude to the 1965 war occurred earlier that year, with limited skirmishes in the Rann of Kutch, a desolate salt marsh on the border between Gujarat in India and Sindh in Pakistan. These engagements, from April to June 1965, saw Pakistani forces achieve some tactical successes against Indian border patrols. While the conflict was contained through British mediation, the outcome had a profound psychological impact on Pakistan's military leadership. They perceived these successes as evidence of their qualitative military superiority and India's supposed lack of resolve. This belief, however misguided, emboldened key figures in the Pakistani establishment, including President Ayub Khan, to consider more ambitious military actions to force a resolution on Kashmir, underestimating India's potential response to a larger provocation. The perceived victory in the Rann of Kutch, coupled with other strategic calculations, led Pakistan's leadership to believe that a window of opportunity existed in 1965. India was still recovering from its defeat in the 1962 Sino-Indian War and was undergoing a period of military expansion and reorganization. Some Pakistani strategists believed India was militarily vulnerable and that its leadership might be unwilling to risk a full-scale war. Furthermore, there was an assumption that a swift, decisive action in Kashmir could internationalize the dispute favorably for Pakistan before India's military modernization fully matured. This assessment, however, overlooked India's growing military strength and its deep political commitment to retaining its part of Kashmir. It was this combination of unresolved historical grievances, tactical overconfidence, and strategic misjudgment that set the stage for the wider conflict. With the belief that the time was ripe for action, Pakistan initiated Operation Gibraltar in August 1965. This covert operation was the brainchild of a confident military and political leadership, including President Ayub Khan, Foreign Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and General Akhtar Malik. The plan was audacious: to infiltrate thousands of specially trained irregulars disguised as locals into Indian-administered Kashmir. The primary objective of these infiltrators was to incite a popular uprising or an insurgency against Indian rule. It was hoped that this internal rebellion, supported by Pakistani forces, would cripple Indian control over the region and compel India to negotiate on Kashmir from a position of weakness. The operation was named after the Moorish invasion of Spain, reflecting the ambitious, perhaps overly romanticized vision of its planners. However, Operation Gibraltar was plagued by critical flaws from its very inception. One of the most significant weaknesses was the severe intelligence gap regarding the actual sentiments of the Kashmiri population in the Indian-administered territory. Pakistani planners largely assumed that the local populace would enthusiastically welcome and support the infiltrators as liberators. This assumption proved to be dangerously incorrect. Furthermore, there was a dire lack of reliable local contacts and networks on the ground to guide and sustain the infiltrated forces. Inter-service coordination between the army, which was spearheading the operation, and other branches of the Pakistani military was also poor, leading to logistical and support deficiencies that would prove costly as the operation unfolded. These foundational weaknesses set the stage for a swift and decisive failure. The failure of Operation Gibraltar was rapid and comprehensive. Instead of rising up in rebellion, many local Kashmiris, wary of the infiltrators and the potential for widespread violence, chose to inform the Indian authorities about their presence and activities. This unexpected local resistance was a critical blow to the operation's success. Indian security forces, alerted by the local population and their own intelligence, moved quickly to counter the infiltration. Many of the Pakistani irregulars were captured, killed, or forced to retreat back across the line of control. The anticipated popular uprising never materialized. The entire premise of Operation Gibraltar, that a small group of infiltrators could spark a mass revolt, was fundamentally flawed, revealing a profound misunderstanding of the complex socio-political dynamics within Kashmir. The swift collapse of Operation Gibraltar had immediate and severe consequences. Not only did it fail to achieve its primary objective of fomenting an insurgency, but it also provided India with a clear casus belli, a justification for war. The presence of Pakistani-backed infiltrators on Indian soil was seen as a direct act of aggression. India, under Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, decided that a limited response confined to Kashmir would not be sufficient. Instead, India chose to escalate the conflict by launching a full-scale military offensive across the international border in Punjab, targeting the Pakistani city of Lahore. This strategic decision transformed what Pakistan had perhaps envisioned as a localized covert operation into an all-out conventional war between the two nations, a war Pakistan was ill-prepared to sustain. India's response to the failure of Operation Gibraltar and the continued infiltration attempts was robust and decisive. On September 6, 1965, the Indian Army launched a major offensive, crossing the international border into West Pakistan. This move marked a significant escalation, transforming the conflict from a Kashmir-centric series of skirmishes and covert operations into a full-blown war. The primary thrust of the Indian attack was directed towards the strategically important city of Lahore, a major urban and economic hub in Pakistani Punjab. The decision to open a new front along the recognized international boundary was a calculated risk by India, aimed at relieving pressure on its forces in Kashmir and demonstrating its resolve to counter Pakistani aggression directly. This bold counterattack caught the Pakistani military leadership by surprise, as they had not anticipated such a broad offensive. Upon learning of the Indian advance towards Lahore, Pakistan's President Ayub Khan addressed the nation via Radio Pakistan. In his speech, he formally declared that Pakistan was at war with India. He called upon the Pakistani people to rise in defense of their homeland, framing the conflict as a struggle for national survival and the liberation of Kashmir. The declaration of war galvanized public opinion in Pakistan, leading to a surge of patriotic fervor. However, it also underscored the gravity of the situation, as the country now faced a conventional war against a larger neighbor, a scenario that its earlier strategic calculations for Operation Gibraltar had failed to adequately prepare for. The war had now officially begun, with both nations committing their full military might to the ensuing battles. The main theaters of war quickly spread beyond just Kashmir. While fighting continued fiercely in sectors like Akhnor in Jammu and Kashmir, where Pakistan aimed to cut off Indian supply lines, new fronts opened up in Punjab and Rajasthan. The Indian offensive towards Lahore saw intense fighting on the city's outskirts. Simultaneously, another major Indian thrust was aimed at the Sialkot sector, another critical area in Pakistani Punjab. Pakistan in turn launched its own counteroffensives, particularly in the southern sector, aiming towards Kemkaran in Indian Punjab. The war rapidly evolved into a series of large-scale tank battles and infantry engagements across a wide front. stretching hundreds of miles along the Indo-Pak border, far beyond the initial confines of the Kashmir dispute. The escalation by India to a full-scale war fundamentally changed the nature of the conflict. Pakistan's initial strategy, centered on a localized insurgency in Kashmir through Operation Gibraltar, was now irrelevant. The country found itself embroiled in a high-intensity conventional war that strained its military resources and tested its strategic depth. The Indian military's multi-pronged assault aimed to disperse Pakistani forces and prevent them from concentrating their strength in any single sector. While Pakistani forces fought valiantly to defend their territory, particularly around Lahore and Sialkot, the shift from a covert operation to a full-fledged war exposed the limitations of Pakistan's initial planning and its capacity to sustain a prolonged, widespread conflict against India's larger military machine. The war was now a test of attrition and national will. The 1965 war witnessed several major battles characterized by intense fighting and significant armored engagements. One of the most notable and decisive encounters was the Battle of Ayub, which took place from September 8th to 10th, 1965, in the Kem-Karan sector of Indian Punjab. Here, Pakistani forces, equipped with then-modern American-supplied Patton tanks, launched a major armored offensive. However, the Indian forces, employing a well-planned defensive strategy in the sugarcane fields, managed to inflict a crushing defeat on the advancing Pakistani armor. Indian Centurion tanks and infantry anti-tank weapons proved highly effective. It is estimated that Indian forces destroyed or captured over 90 Pakistani Patton tanks in this battle, which became famously known as the graveyard of Patton tanks. This victory was a significant morale booster for India and a major setback for Pakistan's offensive capabilities. Aerial warfare also played a prominent role throughout the conflict, with both the Indian Air Force and the Pakistan Air Force engaging in extensive operations. These included air-to-air combat, ground attack missions, and reconnaissance flights. Both sides made competing claims about the number of aircraft shot down. Independent estimates suggest that Pakistan lost between 20 to 43 aircraft, while India's losses were higher, estimated between 75 to 95 aircraft. The Pakistan Air Force, though smaller, was generally considered to have performed effectively, particularly in air defense roles, leveraging its F-86 Sabre jets and skilled pilots. The Indian Air Force, with a larger inventory, conducted numerous sorties in support of ground troops and targeted Pakistani military installations. The air war demonstrated the growing importance of air power in modern South Asian conflicts. In terms of territorial changes, the war resulted in a mixed bag of gains and losses for both countries, though neither achieved a decisive strategic breakthrough. Pakistan managed to capture some territory in the Chamjorian sector in Kashmir, estimated to be around 550 to 700 square kilometers. This advance threatened Indian communication lines to Akhnur. On the other hand, Indian forces made significant inroads into Pakistani territory across various sectors. India seized approximately 1,800 square kilometers of Pakistani land, including the strategically important Haji Pir Pass in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, which was a key infiltration route. Indian forces also made advances in the Sialkot and Lahore sectors, though they were halted before capturing these major cities. These territorial exchanges highlighted the fluid nature of the battlefield. The major battles, such as those in the Lahore sector, Sialkot, and particularly As-Salutar, underscored the intensity and scale of the 1965 war. The battle for the Ikhargil Canal, a defensive waterway protecting Lahore, saw fierce fighting with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Similarly, the Sialkot sector witnessed some of the largest tank battles since World War II, with hundreds of tanks from both armies clashing. While Pakistan successfully defended Lahore and Sialkot from capture, the Indian advances put considerable pressure on Pakistani defenses. The war demonstrated that despite Pakistan's initial tactical successes in some areas, India had the capacity to absorb initial blows and retaliate with significant force across multiple fronts, leading to a costly stalemate rather than a clear victory for either side. Section 5. The Ceasefire and the Tashkent Declaration, a Fragile Peace. After 17 days of intense fighting, the heavy toll in terms of human lives and material resources began to weigh on both India and Pakistan. The international community, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union, grew increasingly concerned about the escalating conflict between the two Commonwealth nations, especially in the Cold War context. The United Nations Security Council passed resolutions calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Facing international pressure, economic strain, and a military situation that had largely devolved into a stalemate with high attrition rates, both India and Pakistan agreed to a UN-mediated ceasefire. The ceasefire came into effect on September 22, 1965, bringing an end to the active hostilities but not to the underlying tensions that had caused the war. To formalize the ceasefire and seek a more lasting resolution, a diplomatic conference was organized in Tashkent, in the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic, now Uzbekistan, under the aegis of the Soviet Union. Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin played the role of mediator between Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri and Pakistani President Ayub Khan. After several days of negotiations, the Tashkent Declaration was signed on January 10, 1966. The agreement stipulated that both sides would withdraw their forces to the positions they held prior to August 5, 1965, effectively meaning a return to the pre-war lines. It also called for the restoration of economic and diplomatic relations, the repatriation of prisoners of war, and a commitment to resolve disputes through peaceful means. Despite the hopes pinned on it, the Tashkent Declaration ultimately failed to address the core issue that had triggered the war: the disputed status of Kashmir. The agreement essentially restored the status quo ante bellum, meaning things went back to how they were before the war. While it succeeded in ending the immediate conflict and ensuring troop withdrawals, it did not provide any roadmap or mechanism for resolving the Kashmir dispute. For Pakistan, which had initiated the conflict with the aim of forcing a favorable outcome on Kashmir, this was a significant disappointment. The agreement was met with considerable public anger and disillusionment in Pakistan, as many felt that the sacrifices made during the war had been in vain, with no tangible gains on the Kashmir front. The Tashkent Agreement, therefore, represented a fragile peace. It papered over the deep-seated animosity and the intractable nature of the Kashmir problem. In India, Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri tragically died of a heart attack in Tashkent just hours after signing the declaration, casting a somber shadow over the agreement. While the agreement did prevent an immediate resumption of hostilities and led to the exchange of captured territories, the fundamental cause of the conflict remained unaddressed. The failure to find a political solution for Kashmir at Tashkent ensured that the region would continue to be a source of friction and a potential catalyst for future conflicts between India and Pakistan, setting the stage for ongoing mistrust and military preparedness on both sides. Section 6. The human cost and diplomatic fallout. The 1965 war, though relatively short, exacted a heavy human toll on both India and Pakistan. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives on the battlefield, and many more were wounded, maimed, or taken as prisoners of war. Civilian populations, particularly in border areas, also suffered due to shelling, displacement, and the disruption of daily life. Accurate casualty figures are often disputed and vary between sources, but it is generally accepted that each side suffered several thousand military fatalities. India reported around 3,000 soldiers killed, while Pakistan's official figures were around 3,800. The number of wounded on both sides was significantly higher. Beyond the immediate casualties, the war left a legacy of grief and loss for countless families, hardening attitudes and deepening the sense of enmity between the two nations. Diplomatically, the war led to significant shifts, particularly for Pakistan. The United States, which had been Pakistan's principal military ally and a major supplier of arms through defense pacts like SEATO and CENTO, imposed an arms embargo on both India and Pakistan once full-scale hostilities broke out. The suspension of all US military assistance on September 8, 1965, was a major blow to Pakistan, which relied heavily on American weaponry, especially for its armored corps and air force. This decision by the Johnson administration signaled a shift in US regional policy, moving towards a more even-handed approach to the subcontinent, and causing considerable resentment in Pakistan, which felt abandoned by its key ally at a critical juncture. Pakistan had also hoped for substantial support from its other allies, notably China. While China did offer strong verbal condemnation of India and provided some moral support, its material assistance was limited. China was itself recovering from the economic crisis following the Great Leap Forward and was cautious about direct military involvement in the Indo-Pak conflict, especially given the potential reactions from the United States and the Soviet Union. This lack of decisive external support left Pakistan feeling increasingly isolated on the international stage. The war exposed the limitations of Pakistan's alliance strategy and underscored the need for greater self-reliance or a diversification of its foreign partnerships, a lesson that would significantly influence its future foreign policy trajectory. The war also had a profound impact on the global perception of the Kashmir dispute and the stability of South Asia. It demonstrated that the unresolved issue of Kashmir was not merely a localized problem, but had the potential to trigger wider conventional warfare between two significant regional powers. The conflict drew in the major global powers, with the US and USSR playing key roles in mediating the ceasefire and the subsequent Tashkent agreement. However, their interventions were primarily aimed at containing the conflict rather than resolving its root causes. The diplomatic fallout included a period of strained relations between Pakistan and the United States, while India, despite also being under the arms embargo, was perhaps less affected due to its policy of non-alignment and diversified sources of military procurement, including the Soviet Union. Section 7. Internal repercussions. Cracks in Pakistan's armor. The 1965 war had significant internal repercussions within Pakistan, particularly concerning its military strategy and leadership. The conflict exposed serious flaws in Pakistan's military planning, inter-service coordination, and overall strategic judgment. The very premise of Operation Gibraltar, that a small number of infiltrators could trigger a mass uprising in Indian-administered Kashmir, proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation based on faulty intelligence and wishful thinking. The subsequent escalation by India across the international border caught the Pakistani High Command off guard, revealing a lack of preparedness for a full-scale conventional war. These shortcomings led to considerable introspection and criticism within military and intellectual circles in Pakistan after the war. Prominent figures within Pakistan's own establishment voiced concerns about the handling of the war. Air Marshal M. Asghar Khan, who was the chief of the Pakistan Air Force until shortly before the war, later criticized the secrecy surrounding the planning of Operation Gibraltar and the overall mismanagement of the conflict in his book, The First Round Indo-Pakistan War 1965. He argued that the operation was launched without adequate consultation and preparation. Similarly, Lieutenant General Asif Durrani in later writings highlighted the flawed assumptions that underpinned Pakistan's strategy. Analyst Rasul Buks Rais concluded that Pakistan was unable to break India's defenses decisively or sustain an all-out conflict, pointing to a fundamental mismatch between strategic ambitions and actual capabilities. The war also had a detrimental impact on the image and morale of the Pakistan Army, which had long been considered the country's most powerful and efficient institution. While Pakistani soldiers fought bravely and achieved some tactical successes, the overall outcome of the war, a return to the pre-war status quo without any gains on Kashmir, was deeply disappointing for a military that had been built up with significant national resources. The failure to achieve a decisive victory, coupled with the high casualties and the exposure of strategic blunders, led to a period of soul-searching. Brigadier A.R. Siddiqui, in his work The Military in Pakistan, Image and Reality, touched upon the challenges the military faced in reconciling its perceived role with the realities of modern warfare and complex political objectives. Furthermore, the economic cost of the war placed a considerable strain on Pakistan's developing economy. Resources that could have been allocated to development and social programs were diverted to the war effort and subsequent military rebuilding. The suspension of US military aid also necessitated a search for alternative sources of weaponry and funding, further impacting economic planning. The perceived failure to achieve national objectives in the war contributed to growing public discontent with President Ayub Khan's regime. While he initially enjoyed a surge in popularity during the conflict, the aftermath, particularly the terms of the Tashkent Declaration, fueled political opposition and contributed to the factors that would eventually lead to his downfall in 1969. The war, in essence, sowed seeds of political instability within Pakistan. Section 8. Echoes in the East, Seeds of Separation. The 1965 war had a particularly profound and negative impact on the eastern wing of Pakistan, then known as East Pakistan, which would later become Bangladesh. During the 17 days of intense conflict, East Pakistan found itself geographically isolated and largely undefended by the West Pakistani-dominated central government and military. The bulk of Pakistan's armed forces, equipment and strategic focus were concentrated in West Pakistan, fighting against India along the Western Front. This left East Pakistan vulnerable, with only a token military presence to guard against any potential Indian aggression from the east. While India chose not to open a major front in the east during the 1965 war, the sense of insecurity and abandonment among the Bengali population was palpable and deeply resented. This feeling of neglect during the war significantly deepened the existing grievances of the Bengali population in East Pakistan. For years, Bengalis had felt economically exploited, politically marginalized, and culturally dominated by the West Pakistani elite. They perceived that the wealth generated by East Pakistan's jute exports was disproportionately used to develop West Pakistan, while their own region remained underdeveloped. The 1965 war added a critical security dimension to these grievances. The argument that East Pakistan's defense lay in West Pakistan, a strategic concept promoted by some in the West, rang hollow when the Eastern Wing felt exposed and alone during a national crisis. This experience starkly highlighted their vulnerability and the central government's perceived indifference to their security concerns. In the aftermath of the 1965 war, these sentiments found strong political expression. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the charismatic leader of the Awami League in East Pakistan, emerged as a powerful voice articulating Bengali aspirations. He put forward his famous six-point program in 1966, which called for significant provincial autonomy for East Pakistan, including the power to maintain its own paramilitary forces for defense and control over its economic resources. The 6 points were a direct response to the perceived injustices and the security vacuum experienced during the war. The central government in West Pakistan viewed these demands as secessionist and a threat to national integrity, further widening the gulf between the two wings of the country. The 1965 war, therefore, inadvertently played a crucial role in accelerating the movement for autonomy and eventually independence in East Pakistan. The war exposed the inherent contradictions in a nation divided by over 1,000 miles of Indian territory with distinct cultural and linguistic identities in its two wings. The feeling of being treated as a colony rather than an equal partner, compounded by the security anxieties triggered by the war, fueled Bengali nationalism. While the actual secession of East Pakistan and the birth of Bangladesh occurred after the 1971 Indo-Pak War, the seeds of that separation were significantly watered by the experiences and disillusionment stemming from the 1965 conflict. The war underscored the fragility of Pakistan's national unity, which was based more on religious identity than on shared political or economic interests between its diverse regions. Section 9A, Lingering Shadow, Long-Term Consequences and Unresolved Issues. The 1965 war left a long and dark shadow over Indo-Pak relations, with several enduring consequences. Perhaps the most significant was that the core dispute over Kashmir remained entirely unresolved. The Tashkent Declaration merely restored the pre-war situation, failing to provide any mechanism for a lasting political settlement. This meant that Kashmir continued to be the primary source of tension, mistrust, and recurring conflict between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. The line of control, born from the 1948 ceasefire and reaffirmed after 1965, remained a heavily militarized and volatile frontier. The failure to address the Kashmir issue ensured that peace in the subcontinent would remain fragile, punctuated by periodic crises and military standoffs. In the wake of the war, and particularly due to the US arms embargo, Pakistan undertook a significant strategic reorientation. Feeling let down by its traditional Western allies, Pakistan began to deepen its strategic partnership with China. This relationship, which had been developing prior to 1965, solidified in the war's aftermath, with China becoming a major supplier of military hardware and a key diplomatic supporter for Pakistan. India, on its part, also embarked on a sweeping program of military modernization. The war exposed certain weaknesses in its own armed forces, leading to increased defense spending, diversification of arms procurement, notably from the Soviet Union, and a focus on enhancing its indigenous defense production capabilities. Both nations thus entered into a sustained period of military build-up. The 1965 war, by leaving the central issues unaddressed, essentially set the stage for future conflicts. The deep-seated animosity and the unresolved Kashmir dispute directly contributed to the much larger 1971 Indo-Pak War, which resulted in the secession of East Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh. Later, the Kargil conflict of 1999, though more localized, was another manifestation of the persistent tensions over Kashmir, again involving Pakistani intrusions across the line of control. The legacy of 1965 also saw Pakistan in subsequent decades being accused of supporting non-state militant groups operating in Kashmir, a policy that brought it international scrutiny and, at times, sanctions, further complicating regional stability and its own international standing. Ultimately, the 1965 war is often viewed as a cautionary tale of tactical bravado leading to strategic stalemate, particularly from Pakistan's perspective, which initiated the escalation through Operation Gibraltar. While both India and Pakistan initially claimed victory for domestic consumption, most neutral assessments conclude that the war was largely inconclusive in military terms, with neither side achieving its core objectives. It resulted in heavy human and economic costs for both nations and further entrenched the Kashmir dispute. The war underscored the dangers of miscalculation in a volatile region and highlighted the tragic reality that military conflict, rather than resolving disputes, often only deepens divisions and sows the seeds for future confrontations, a pattern that has sadly characterized Indo-Pak relations for much of their history.